You know what they are, I know what they are, so let's talk about them. Now, if I was a freshman in high school, I start this off with something like, Webster's dictionary defines vibes as a personal, emotional state or the atmosphere, blah, blah, blah. And by Webster, I really mean Google, because I mean, who still actually uses physical dictionaries? What are you, some kind of English bald monk? Get that shit out of here. We have calculators in our phones, Mr. Song. How about you use the quadratic equation to find all the factors that made you wrong, you asshole? Anyways, the irony of this definition is that while technically accurate, it's the most anti-vibes definition to vibes. It would probably be easier to show you something like this. Vibes are everywhere. A fit can be a vibe, a song can be a vibe, your mom's spaghetti can be a vibe. I'm fully convinced the internet is just powered by vibes at this point, as it permeates every corner of it. You have a bunch of bozos writing 45-minute videos on why The Simpsons are great and relevant. Shit, it's just vibes. You think these Zoomers have the attention span to sit through a 22-minute episode of anything? Nah, they just recognize vibes. I always push back on this notion that vibes are just people's nostalgia, because vibes are so transcendent and powerful, they'll make you nostalgic for a time you weren't even around for. I was never a Japanese man bopping a city pop any more than the Zoomers were watching The Simpsons, you know? So what does it have to do with gaming? I mean, this still is a gaming channel, no? Well, I was planning to review Metroid Dread when it came out, but I hit a wall when I recognized it would just be another review that highlights some good points, but ultimately state that the game is just okay and left me pretty unsatisfied. The same old experience that has defined this era of gaming for me and many others. And honestly, Metroid can't really afford the criticism because it just seems to be one of those few IPs Nintendo is just itching to find reasons to lock back in its dungeon, kinda like F-Zero. If you haven't gotten it already, then go buy it and have fun. There are definitely worse ways to be introduced to the Metroid franchise at this point. Reflecting on the franchise though got me thinking that at its best, Metroid has some raw sci-fi vibes which make the best entry stand above many other games. In fact, most of the games that I hold in high regard are games that have vibes so thick they're honorary Kardashians. So today I want to talk about gaming's secret sauce and what goes into it.
Game be without platforms. I wonder if there's any extra lives up there.
When it comes to graphics, I'm about to pour this ice-cold bucket of hard truths all over y'all. Ready? Realism is cringe.
Why you pouring me? I'm right.
Yep, nothing but hot takes in this motherfucker. Let me take you back to 2001, after the GameCube came out. Naturally, everyone was excited for the next evolution of Nintendo games, and Zelda was at the top of that list. After the groundbreaking direction that was Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, we all sat in anticipation for the next step. Nintendo took stage and out came out Wind Waker, and the fans lost their collective shit. The art style was unlike anything these smooth brains expected, and everyone was crying about realism that they automatically wrote this game off. Fast forward 21 years later, and bam, best looking Zelda. Want an HD remake? Up the resolution, give it some bloom, and bam, we next gen now. That's how good this shit was. Hell, even Smash treats this version of Link as its own thing, and if I can give another hot take, best Link that there ever was. It's the only one that actually has personality, and a great deal of it comes from the fact that the art style allows for very expressive faces that still hold up, while every attempt at realism just looks uncanny. This whimsical looking ass shit was just pure fucking vibes. You could feel the adventure just pouring out the screen. 21 years later, and sailing the ocean just hits you looking all gorgeous. See, art style is the vision into the vibe that the game is trying to convey. Vibes need to feel otherworldly. It's a distortion of reality set to a feeling. I mean, when you think about dope vibes in your life, you see events through this fog of feeling. When you went out with your friends at night because you totally had them and got drunk while listening to tunes that slap, it becomes more than the mundane. It ascends to another plane of existence, even if the actual thing happening is relatively normal. Games that focus on this sense rather than depicting reality often have the stronger vibes. It's art using reality as a springboard. I think at its heart, limitations are important to create art that showcases strong vibes. Through the different tools, you'll see that limitations are often the reasons you get a great design choice that heavily affects the mood of a game. The classic example that everyone knows is Silent Hill, where fog was used to hide the draw distance limitations of the hardware because rendering more than 2 things on a PlayStation 1 would just... Yeah. Anyways, then there's Symphony of the Night, which refused to go 3D and instead used the newfound space to perfect the old ways of the past, creating beautiful sprites that have yet to be rivaled. I mean, just look at this shit. This man walks and flows with so much swagger, he strides, he vibes, and he has all his... This is where remakes and remasters often miss the mark, because the natural instinct is to use modern technology to break past these limits, while completely disregarding that these limits led to creative choices that contributed to the vibe. Let's take San Andreas for example. It has a memorable orange tint to everything, because once again, draw distance was an issue, which led the world feeling like it had this 90s West Coast rap video vibe. Then you have the remastered, and while things are more analogous to reality, it just loses the vibe. It's this assumption that more details equals better, but if you take a lesson from the great grandfather of the medium, novels, you understand that the power really lies in what happens in your mind rather than the lengthy descriptions that the author writes. They have to write just enough to give you a place to start, and the rest is up to your imagination to run wild with. Pixel art backgrounds employ this idea well since you can't just go into the background and see what's there. A game with great vibes will have a background that entices your imagination by giving you a jumping point. Games with pixel art especially have room to get creative because lighting is in service to the art, not reality. I mean, look at this shit. You can put these side by sides into the eyes of a fucking homunculi. This shit looks like you wrote your book 30 minutes before it was due. And yet spend any time in it and realize that the lack of a background actually becomes like a sense of dread. Damn, I'm good. This is space. This is a hostile planet. This is what it feels like. Not what it actually would look like, but what it feels like. That's a fucking vibe. Now I know the first response is that I'm a boomer stuck in the past and just think new bad, old good. But hey, the graphic discussion always brings this up. There are examples in the modern age with modern techniques that work with what I'm saying. Let's take Breath of the Wild, which was so uniquely good, Genshin Impact said, I'm just take this. To me, this was a compromise between the wonderful art style of Wind Waker and our desire for that mature Zelda that wouldn't be god-awful to look at. You know who I'm talking about. Now, if that's still too baby for you, then let's take Elden Ring, which is like 99% the reason this video took a literal century to make. These Dark Soul-like games all have a distinct feeling to them. These worlds that are bleak and always feel like they're dying, while simultaneously keeping this larger-than-life aspect to it. You always feel like a tiny little thing fighting through these giants and traversing a world that is so much bigger than you. Sure, it may be more grounded in aspects of reality than NES Metroid, but at the same time, a giant wolf with a sword comes through to fight you, so, you know, that's kind of a vibe. Basically, art style is way more important to a vibe than the technical aspects of the graphics themselves. If it's not unique, if it's not otherworldly, if it doesn't let your imagination run wild, then you better make damn sure you can create a vibe in some other way. Kinda like... I mean, do I really need to continue? That's the power of music and the vibe it creates. Once again, in the early days, technical limitations meant that the space for music was essentially a New York City apartment, so you really had to make the most of it. They would be looped, and heard many times, so they needed to be catchy while simultaneously being good enough that it wouldn't want to make you rip your ears off. This very early period also has an advantage that contributed to the unique aspect of the tracks, and that's the hardware. The composition was part of it, but the unique sound of, let's say, a Genesis would make it feel like a Genesis song, and nothing else could really match it. Now, I'm no musical expert, but to me, these songs just have like this sticky quality to them, and they stick in your mind well after you've heard them. Even the most normie of normies can appreciate and vibe to something like, let's say, Marble Zone. And believe me, I'm like 20-0 in my attempts to get people to listen to this. This shit bangs so hard it makes a terrible level actually become a favorite. Now, as we move closer to modern age, I feel like the PlayStation 1 and N64 era has always been the more interesting era, because we reached a new height in technology, but there were still a lot of limitations around the products that we had. Final Fantasy VII, for example, had way more space for music this time around, and yet it wasn't enough space that it could just use CD audio, so it uses MIDI, and that led to the soundtrack having a very distinct sound. The Midgar slums has a sense of dread. The Genova theme sounds mystical, but also has a sense of urgency. We had the sounds available, but the goal to make things sticky was there on the mark. I'm not a musician by any stretch, as I said before, so I can't break the theory down on why so many of these songs have such a strong vibe, but my ears definitely can tell the difference. In the modern age, music selection is even more significant in my opinion. It's not that the quality has gone down, I just think it's way too easy to create serviceable content. With graphics and music, you can be pretty mid and just coast on branding. Gameplay needs to come through for sure, and even that can be debated for things like this. But the other aspects can be phoned in. When something hits though, whether it be in the past or the present, it hits. It's crazy to think that Doom's 2016 soundtrack could have been potentially phoned in. Not this epic metal masterpiece that we got, but some spacey ambiance instead. Thankfully, we have Mick Gordon who saw this and said, no, this was not gonna work. It wasn't just a decision to have guitars that made the soundtrack an instant hit either. It was his approach to the project. Let's take all this tech available and be as unconventional as possible. Sampling chainsaws and using choirs, he went for a vibe beyond anything else, and it pulls through. BFG Division starts to play, and I don't care who you are, you're ready to slay some demons back to hell. Hotline Miami using synthwave, Fallout using Americana, Cuphead using big band jazz. All these games look and sound distinct, and that's what creates a vibe. Being intentional is the name of the game. Why are you picking that art style? Why are you picking that genre? These are questions that should be clear to answer when I'm playing your game. And another big question is, why are you even speaking to me?
Oh, it's you.
You know her?
It's been a long time.
Writing is just another tool in which to create your vibe. I'm not necessarily talking about plot or even lore, although those do have a place in the equation, but I think the big one is character. We've long covered how I think the focus on narrative is misplaced, and thinking you can carry your whole game is just incredibly incorrect. Or, it could also make you a bunch of money. Characters, however, can really make or break your vibe in a game. Let's take Undertale, for example. This is a game that could have easily been used in the graphics section for its minimalist approach that creates this large mystery around to make you feel like a fish out of water. Or I could have put it in the music section because, To me, though, the real core of the game comes from the characters. I mean, the good way to play this game has you heavily interacting with the world and the characters in it, so there's this large emphasis on their personalities. Honestly, this game is just a masterclass in merging all the previous tools and writing to create a truly unique experience. Sans' relationship with you and his brother matches his goofy nature of his fawn and his laid-back design. The way Papyrus takes himself so seriously and yet is so clearly out of his element, just like his fawn. This world feels lived in and the characters feel real. You understand who they are and why they are, which makes it easy to see them outside of the scope of you. If you didn't exist, you can still imagine a world where Sans is cracking jokes and driving his brother crazy. And that's good writing. Left 4 Dead is another example. Here, everyone thought that Back 4 Blood was just going to be Left 4 Dead 3 and... yeah, not good. It had none of the charm of the original series, visually or in the writing of the characters. The world felt generic and the infected felt generic. It came and went faster than you after No Nut November. Each member of the original crew, or the one from part 2, was carefully selected to complement each other. The personalities were crafted so that there would be conflict, but also enough common ground to build bonds. Valve has always been a master at building vibes through writing alone. Portal, was just a tech demo that became such an influential game after Valve hit it with that Valve magic. Put a heart in a cube and make the most memorable AI this side of System Shock 2, and bam, instant classic. Hell, I'll even concede God of War and The Last of Us 1 really make the world come alive through its main characters. That father-child relationship just plucks at all the right strings in my poor bastard heart. I don't know, I just can't help but to like it. Sure, it's subpar in other areas, but whatever, a win is a win. With all the resources we have, it's easy to slip into what already works. Like a hoodie we always wear, we feel secure and can bet on the results we're gonna get. Unfortunately, there is no worse vibe than being mid. It's forgettable. It's a true gamer's hell that so many games end up in. Just something to pass the time until the real groundbreaking stuff arrives, and after all that work, is that really what you want your game to be?